Interpretation, we can hear you. Thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Bonjour, mesdames et messieurs. We'll start our meeting of FEDCO in 1 minute. On va commencer la réunion dans 1 minute. Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Finance and Economic Development Committee for the City of Ottawa. Bienvenue à la Comité de Finances et de Développement économique pour la Ville d'Ottawa. Do we have quorum, Madam Coordinator?
Yes, we do, Mr. Chair.
Okay. A few reminders for today's meeting, which is being held using Zoom. Members of committee and staff, please stay on mute at all times unless called upon to speak. Members of council, if you wish to speak to an item, please use the raise hand feature located at the bottom of the participants list, or *9 for members on the phone. And this meeting will be live streamed on YouTube. Members and staff are asked to position their cameras to their faces and make sure they're centered as close as the top of the frame as possible. And phone-in participants, please do not put your phone on hold. Okay, so before I proceed, or we proceed rather, we'll do a quick roll call. Councillor Cloutier.
Present.
Councillor Cloutier.
Present.
Councillor DeRose.
Here, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Gower.
Here.
Councillor Harder.
Here.
Councillor Hubley.
Here.
Councillor Luloff.
Je suis présent.
Councillor Moffat.
Here.
Councillor Suds.
Here.
Councillor Tierney.
Present.
Councillor Dudas.
Ici.
And I'm here too.
Sorry, Councillor El Shantiri.
The birthday boy.
Present.
We're just having a little
Eli.
problem with the
Thank you.
volume. If you just hold for a second.
We can test the volume by singing Eli happy birthday if you'd like.
Oh, no, it's okay.
That would be
It's
an
okay.
amazing idea.
Is it Eli's birthday today?
You
Yes.
betcha.
Eli, what are you, 72, 73?
Now we're getting into
Myself
details.
earlier.
He's just a little older than me.
Heading to the cliff. Happy
Um,
birthday, Eli.
Thank you. Thank
yes,
you very
happy
much.
birthday, Eli. And
Thank you,
it's
sir, Mayor.
Takeout Friday, so we look forward to seeing what you're going to order for you and Maha.
Poor Eli.
Declaration of interest, déclaration de conflit d'intérêt. Finance services, this is our one item on the agenda. 2021 tax ratios and other tax policies. We have Wendy Stephenson and Joseph Mahoney are going to do a presentation. We have no members of the public who have signed up for this. And then we'll go to questions and comments from members of council. So Wendy, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much. Merci, Monsieur le Maire et les membres du comité.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair.
To offer a short presentation on our 2021 tax policies and to spend a bit of time this morning to outline the small business subclass framework with everyone. And this is an annual report that comes after our budget approval and after the issuance of our interim property tax bills. And these policies have to be approved prior to the issuance of our final bills that will go out in early May. And I know the report is a little bit technical, so we're going to do our best to simplify the conversation this morning. And lastly, I just want to thank you to all of the members for the special meeting. We were delayed slightly this year as a result of COVID, and we very much appreciate the meeting today to walk you through this. Next slide, please, Carol. So following budget approval, as you know, staff present the annual tax policy report, which recommends tax policies based on our budget requirement. And council must approve the following items every year. So we have to approve all of the tax classes and our discounts that are associated with those, our tax ratios, the adoption of our technical adjustment, our public institution levies, our property tax due dates for the following year, as well as our mitigation policies and programs. It's also an opportunity to provide updates and recommendations on other property tax issues and revenue issues. And the recommendations that you're going to see today are very consistent with those from previous years. And lastly, we're going to present a framework on the optional small business subclass that we plan to consult with the business community once the report is approved by council. Prochaine diapo, s'il vous plaît. Next slide, please. So I'm going to provide a little bit of context in terms of our property tax billing. We have about 345,000 property owners in the city of Ottawa, and they get a bill 2 times every year. The first bill went out, which was due the 3rd Thursday in March, and the final bill will go out in, I'm going to say mid to late May, with a due date of Thursday in June. And property taxes are a pretty simple equation. It's basically the tax rate times the property assessment value. And the bill also includes our provincial education amount, where the city bills and collects and remits to the province. So we do that on their behalf. And approximately 6 times a year, we do our supplementary and our additional tax bills for things like new construction and work that's been done on properties where folks have retained a permit for that, and it adds value to the actual property. And we've gone a long way in terms of, I'm going to say, automating our process, as well as those folks who pay electronically. And approximately 80% of our owners pay electronically, which is, I'm going to say, the least expensive way to pay. So it's music to our ears. And as announced by the province, we know that reassessment is again delayed. We expect news on that in Q3 of 2021, following stakeholder consultation. Prochaine diapo, s'il vous plaît. So as part of the 2020 budget, the province is reducing business education rates by 10%. And what that means for the city of Ottawa is that 9,000 commercial properties and 30% for approximately 1,500 office and industrial properties will see a reduction on their final tax bill this year. And this equates to approximately $35 million in savings for business education taxes for our commercial and industrial properties in the city. And just as an example, a small commercial property assessed at $600,000 in 2020 will see a permanent reduction on their tax bill of $600. And a medium commercial property assessed at approximately $4 million in 2020 is going to see a permanent reduction of about $4,000. Prochaine diapo, s'il vous plaît. So the technical adjustment to the property tax rates was introduced by the province in 2016 to allow municipalities to recover assessment appeal losses for the prior year. And the city has adopted this technical adjustment every year since 2016. And this report recommends that it be adopted again in 2021. Included in the recommendations is the $7.6 million from the technical adjustment be allocated first as $3.5 million to the shortfall for assessment growth in 2021, as our growth came in just slightly lower than what we had forecasted. And secondly, $4.1 million go to the transit services operating budget for 2021 to permanently fix the fare revenue base increase. I'll now pass it over to Joseph. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Wendy. Next, okay, we're on the next slide. So we'll talk a little bit about ratio setting for 2021. So a tax ratio is a proportion by which a tax class rate compares to the residential tax class rate, which has a ratio of 1. Every year, taxes shift naturally between classes due to reassessment or other mitigating adjustments. So tax ratios allow municipalities to manage the shifting of the property tax burden between classes. Tax shifting causes one class to benefit at the expense of another. And therefore, each year, council may adopt prior year ratios, and prior year ratios will allow for tax shifting or they can adopt neutral ratios, which mitigate the tax shifting. Traditionally, Council has adopted neutral ratios to keep the tax burden from shifting between classes. This report for this year is recommending that Council adopt neutral ratios in 2021. Adopting neutral ratios will avoid a $3.5 million shift from the commercial and multi-residential class to the residential class, and will allow all classes to equally experience the same increase of 3%. Okay. Les impôts des institutions publiques sont calculés d'après la
Other tax and revenue updates for public institution levy are based on a capacity of a provincial approach of $75. This has been approved by the provincial government. The municipality has to distribute in June the sums. In this report, we recommend to continue on the actual programs. We want to provide a 40% tax rebate to charitable organizations. We want also to have a deferral programs for tax and water, for low-income seniors and persons with disabilities. We also have a grant program, a farm grant program.
The payment card processing bylaw established in 2013 to pass on merchant processing fees to residents who make payments using payment cards. Merchant fees are incurred when residents use a payment card to pay for city services. Since this bylaw was written, payment options have evolved. And therefore, this report is recommending some bylaw amendments to reflect the evolution of service and also due to new enterprise applications as follows. Where the city, actually back to the previous slide, where the city is a merchant of record, the city continue to pass on the transaction fees to users. And where this contracted with third-party payment providers, that the city continue to pass on the contracted transaction fees to users. And finally, we want to continue to allow business lines that do not pass on transaction fees to continue to do so, but provide them the option to make a change in future. Next slide, please. And I will move on to the small business framework. In November 2020, the province announced the creation of an optional small business subclass. The optional small business subclass is a permanent subclass and can be used by municipalities for long-term tax policy planning. The province has provided the flexibility to municipalities to define a small business to reflect their local circumstances. Since the enabling provincial regulation is still pending and consultation with stakeholders is required, the most interested municipalities are considering implementation in 2022 and beyond. In reviewing the small business subclass, staff were guided by some of the following principles. The first one being, the small business subclass should not add administrative burden to the city or burden the residential class. The second is, there is no funding available, and therefore the introduction of the small business subclass must remain revenue neutral. Finally, the small business subclass should be fair and equitable. Next slide, please. So we'll talk about the definition of a small business under this framework. So generally, a small business can be defined by revenues, number of employees, or by square footage. A small business subclass defined by revenue or number of employees will have to be application-based. And because the city must consider the administrative aspect in creating a definition, a small business definition based on revenue or number of employees is not recommended. Square footage, however, and property use information is readily available through MPAC and can be used to define a small business. Next slide, please. So how did we go about this in terms of determining what a small business definition would look like? All properties are assigned a primary use code by MPAC. Based on a review of all these codes, staff have determined that the following lend themselves to a small business definition or a definition that houses small businesses. These include small office, commercial with residential, commercial condo, retail in a house, small retail with office, restaurants, driving ranges, industrial condominiums, industrial malls, motels, daycares, among others listed on this slide. Next slide, please. Okay. This slide shows visual examples of small businesses that would actually meet the definition. So here we can actually see a little store with residential at the top. The second one is a restaurant, and the third one is again a restaurant with some residential at the top. Next slide, please. This slide now shows visual examples of an industrial mall and a commercial condominium that would meet the definition. Next slide, please. In addition to these properties, there are larger properties that may house small businesses, but will need to be capped by 15,000 square feet in order to qualify. These include specialty automotive, neighborhood shopping centers, community shopping centers, multi-type complexes, mixed retail, standard industrial properties, assembly halls, community halls, and clubs, both private and fraternal. Next slide, please. So finally, in terms of a small business definition, the small business subclass discount will only apply to the commercial, office, and industrial classes. Qualifying properties in the shopping class will not get this discount. This is because large retail properties with over 25,000 square feet attract the shopping class rate, which is 1.4 times the residential rate, while small commercial properties under 25,000 square feet attract a commercial class rate, which is 1.8 times the residential rate. As a result, large retail properties already enjoy a reduced tax rate, while smaller commercial properties do not. Next slide, please. So what options do we have as a city? First option we have is we can remain status quo and not adopt the optional small business class. Or we can consider a 10% small business subclass discount by further exploring the framework that we've presented here today. This framework captures 4,700 properties that meet the definition out of the 12,000 commercial and industrial properties in Ottawa. This equates to 39% of the total commercial and industrial properties in Ottawa, or approximately 7,800 businesses that would meet this definition. Now, the remaining 7,300 out of the 12,000 that will not, commercial and industrial properties that will not meet this definition and don't qualify for the small business subclass discount will be referred to or are referred to as residual properties. A small business subclass discount to qualifying properties will be funded by a slight increase in taxes to the residual properties. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's see what that small business discount would look like. So the province may choose to match the city's approved small business subclass discount on the education taxes. In this example, a small business assessed at $600,000 and pays $15,000 in municipal and education taxes will receive a $1,000 discount off their tax bill and an additional $500 should the province choose to match the discount on the education rate. So in total, this property would receive a $1,500 discount at the 10% rate. Next slide, please. So how will this small business subclass be funded? La remise consentie aux petites entreprises qui équivaut à un total de 5.
The discount that will be a total of $6 million. It will be financed by the small business taxes. In the example that we have a commercial property assessed at $4 million. They have to pay $67,000 in municipal taxes. And they will see an increase of their tax by 0.88%. This will be equivalent to $900.
will be funded by a slight increase of taxes for the 7,300 residual properties. In this example, a commercial residual property assessed at $4 million and pays 102 in municipal and education taxes in 2021 will see an increase of $900, which equates to a 0.88 increase or $900. Next slide, please. Okay, so in order to understand the implications of this change to the residual properties, it is vital to take a longer and holistic view of all the changes that are happening within property taxation for the commercial and industrial classes. In this example, in 2020, a commercial residual property assessed at $4 million paid $104,000 in municipal and education taxes. In 2021, this property will see a permanent business education tax reduction of $4,000, as discussed earlier in this presentation, and a municipal tax increase of $2,000, resulting in a total tax bill of $102,000 in 2021. In 2022, this property will see the anticipated annual municipal tax increase of $2,000 and a potential optional small business subclass increase of $900, resulting in a total tax bill of $102,900. This means that over 3 years, this commercial property will see a $900 tax increase, or 0.86%. This compared to other properties in other classes, which will experience a 6.2% tax increase over the same period. Next slide, please. And now I'll introduce the topic of excess land, and I'll explain why this is critical in terms of the consideration of the small business class. Excess land is the undeveloped portion of a commercial or industrial property that already has existing structures or buildings. Previously, the province had a mandatory 30% discount for commercial properties and a 35% discount on industrial properties. In 2017, the province gave municipalities the option to reduce or eliminate this discount through provincial regulation. And in the fall of 2020, through the provincial budget, further streamlined the process by allowing municipalities to do so through a bylaw. The province eliminated the excess land subclass discount on the education rates in 2019. In Ottawa, there are 430 properties that with an excess land component. This equates to 3.3% of the total commercial and industrial properties here in Ottawa. The elimination of the excess land subclass discount in tandem with the implementation of the small business subclass discount gives an opportunity to soften the increase experienced by residual properties from implementing the small subclass discount by 0.2%. This means that instead of a 0.88 increase, as we discussed earlier, residual properties would only experience a 0.68% increase. And with that, I'll now pass it back over to Wendy.
Well, thanks so much, Joseph. And just to wrap up, the following are really the next steps that we have to do. And you can flip to the next slide, please, Carol. We need to wait for the enabling provincial regulations, and we very much look forward to reviewing them to understand the provincial framework around this new small business subclass. And we're going to commence consultation with the broader business community on the framework that we've presented today once it's approved by Council, and report back in Q3 2021 with a view of implementation in 2022. And that recommendation, if we move forward, will include the implementation of a small business subclass along with the elimination of the excess land discount at the same time. So this is the end of the presentation. Merci, Monsieur le Maire et les membres du comité.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor and members of the committee. That's the end of this presentation. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Joseph, thank you very much, Wendy and Joseph. Just a couple of observations. First of all, thank you and your staff for all of the work you put into this, and Mathieu Gravel from my office worked with our economic development table that, of course, Eli and Laura are involved with, and Jenna through Invest Ottawa, and Jan through the planning department. And I know every member of council has heard from small businesses in their own particular ward how they've had to suffer significantly over the course of the last year and a half. And this is a good example of big business helping small business. A lot of the big businesses, as you know, recorded significant increases in profits. Walmart's, Costco, Amazon, they did very well and have continued to do very well during the pandemic. It's the small businesses, mostly family owned, that are having a very, very difficult time. So we're asking those big businesses, those large corporate citizens, to pay a little more so that the small businesses can pay a little bit less. And I think most people would agree this is a reasonable proposal that's been put forward that shows our concern, legitimate concern for those small businesses on our main streets and in every ward in the city. It's been really tough for them, and you see almost on a daily basis a new for sale or for lease sign or going out of business sign on some of these stores. So as I said, the big corporate giants have done very, very well, staying open by and large for the most part. It's the small businesses that this policy is aiming to help. And I thank members of council who got in touch with my office and Wendy's office to put this proposal before you. And we thank the province for the work that they did in order to bring forward regulations that allow us to do this. So we have a number of members of council who would like to ask questions or offer comments, and we'll begin with the birthday boy, Eli.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Wendy and Joseph, for your. So I have 3 quick questions. First one is on slide 7 when you talk about the farm grant. Can you just elaborate a little bit about this, please?
Councillor, it's the same program that we've had for a number of years now, and that's where we're able to basically push back that due date to near of the end of the year. So our recommendation in the report is to continue to do so in 2021.
And obviously I'm in full support of that, and I thank you for that, but it should be a communication just for that item, if you don't mind, to be, so we can share it in our farming community, because that is a good news and to be shared around. My other question is, so the large businesses pay 1.5% after residential and the small business pay 1.8. Is those set up by the province, or we can make some changes, permanent changes to them?
So the ratios that we have today were initially established when we switched into this new tax regime that we are in 2001, and those ratios are governed or I guess in terms of how we can change them is very much prescribed by provincial regulation. So in certain cases, the province will allow those ratios to shift naturally, depending on the assessment changes that are occurring within the industry for those classes. And in most cases, municipalities can only bring those ratios down, but we're not really able to increase them. So there is some lack of flexibility that's not available to us in terms of correcting some of those issues. So for example, you mentioned the shopping class. There's only so much that we can do within the regulations that are in place in terms of trying to bring that ratio up.
And that's why I'm going with that question, Joseph. So is there's a possibility, with what we see now, for the mayor to work with the province and make some of those changes? I mean, I know there's a governance and all, I understand all what you're saying, but the question to you is there's an appetite? Is there's a way where we can engage the province and make some changes? Because we saw the small businesses, they're suffering enough, but to see at the end of the day, they are paying more than the large businesses. That's something I think there is an appetite for change.
So I'll say the commercial class covers a lot of different properties. So unfortunately, some of the smaller businesses were lumped in with some of the larger commercial properties. Just blanketly bringing down the commercial rate would probably not be the best approach. The tool that has actually been offered here through the small business class discount is probably a tool that's actually a little bit more targeted, that helps us identify those small businesses and provide relief where it's needed, while keeping some of the larger businesses within that category. So unfortunately, the way things were, and I think this is part of why the province is sort of responding to this request from municipalities, that we needed a tool that sort of separated some of those smaller businesses from some of the larger businesses in that commercial tax class.
Thank you. And my final question, and I know this is maybe we need a little bit more time to digest it. The impact. So the impact is obviously they're behind because of the pandemic, and because now with the market value the way it is in Ottawa or in major city of Ontario, and the lack of high rises or offices value in decline, is that going to make a huge shift for our city, or is it premature to think about it?
I think it's a little bit too soon. I think we're yet to see what the province will announce in terms of the timing of the reassessment. Once the reassessment dates are announced and once the new values come out, I think we'll be able to see, based on the valuation date that is announced by the province, we'll be able to see how the office valuations have changed in comparison to some of the other commercial or industrial valuations and residential valuations. And that will sort of dictate maybe some of the changes that we're going to see in terms of the ratios that will sort of flow from that.
Okay. Well, that's my question. Thank you very much, Joseph, Wendy. Really appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor, for your work on it as well. Councillor Dudas, please.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just have two quick questions. My understanding when the province announced this is that they had also indicated they may be matching municipal property tax reductions if we were to implement this. Is that still your understanding that they might go forward with that?
That's our understanding, Councillor. We can make, I think, what's called an application to the province to match our reduction, which would be tremendous for the change in terms of the taxes here.
Okay, so what we're talking about is not only the municipality providing supports for our businesses, our small businesses, but also that it would be matched by the provincial government. So we'd have a double whammy.
Yeah, correct.
Okay, and I also wanted to just get a little bit of an understanding as to how you landed on the 10%. So from my reading through the provincial documents, it doesn't give a set number, and that some of our businesses have asked for a higher percentage. But could you kind of explain to me why 10% was what staff are recommending at this time?
Sure. Our overall goal here is really to provide, I'm going to say, as much help to as many businesses as possible, but also understand what the burden is going to be on those residual properties. And I think Joseph spoke to it well in terms of the presentation. So it's trying to find that balance between what can we offer that won't be so much of a burden. And that's, one of the ways that we landed on the 10%. The other piece is really aligned with our guiding principles to ensure that we're being fair and equitable to all.
Perfect. And I think that the permanency of this measure is incredibly important. I know that we heard yesterday from Ottawa Tourism that our tourism sector is going to be bearing the brunt of the financial impacts from COVID-19 for many years to come. Our businesses are going to take many, many years to get through this. But this isn't just a COVID measure. This is a permanent support system for our small businesses so they can thrive. And I really wanted to thank Joseph and Wendy and your whole team on all the work they've done on this, and for the mayor for putting in this inquiry. It's very much appreciated. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Next is Councillor Harder, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Wendy, for the conversation we had last night. I was able to share that with the business community out here, that staff, the firm assurance that you'll be consulting under this framework once we receive the optional small business property tax subclass today, and reporting back in Q3. That was really important because there's a lot of questions. So thank you for that. And, Councillor Sudds and I have spoken about, the difference for wins, if you will, for businesses in different parts of the structure of our city, because it is so diverse. But I do have a question for you. If the cap is 15,000 square feet and shopping center begins at 25,000, what about that missing middle? What happens to the ones that fall in between that aren't already getting the lower tax rate of shopping center classification?
So I can start off and then I'm going to ask Joseph to speak to the actual square footage piece. I think it's important this morning to understand and to know that all businesses across Ottawa and all in Ontario will see a reduction in their business education taxes. And we know that that reduction is going to be 10% and 30% for some of the smaller in terms of industrial properties. So everybody is going to see that benefit, and that benefit will be a permanent benefit that the provincial government is pushing forward from this year on. And I'm just going to ask Joseph to step in and talk about the square footage piece and how that fits into this picture.
Thank you, Wendy. So when we reviewed all the properties that were out there that we felt would house small businesses, I think 15,000 square feet is the number that sort of really popped out because we wanted to be cognizant that we were not extending this benefit to properties that are not small businesses, right? So you're right, there is a gap between the 15,000 and the 25,000, and that is something we can continue to review. But our preliminary review in terms of presenting this framework really showed that I think the 15,000 square foot cap captures the small business community that we really want to target.
I think that, it may be different in certain areas, in some of the areas, and that's why I'm glad that we have the consultation period.
Yeah.
But thank you for that. And I just have another question. What does this mean for the mixed-use properties that are both residential and commercial, who operate businesses at already a significantly lower tax rate than competing businesses in the area?
So I'll say in properties that are mixed residential and commercial, the commercial component is already attracting the commercial rate. So if there's commercial business that's going on within a residential property or within a residential building, and it's kind of split as a mixed use, and a portion of it is commercial and portion is residential, the residential component will attract the residential rate, and impact will assess the commercial component under the commercial rate. So ideally, a person across the street that's also renting or that's in a building that's fully commercial, and the person that's in a mixed use building that's doing business are paying the same tax rate.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Jan, or Councillor Harder. Conseiller Cloutier, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Mr. Mayor. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. And yes, like my colleagues have said, thank you to the Finance Department, Ms. Stephenson and Mr. Mahoney for your work, not only on this, but in keep giving us the information we need with respect to the pandemic and dealing with the issues that the city deals with. Just so that I'm clear, the elements of the report we're passing today, the ratios, are for 2021. The elements that are related to the small business class are for 2022. Is that correct?
That's correct, Councillor.
Okay, thank you. And further to Deputy Mayor Dudas's question, any support from the provincial government would be used to the benefit of the small business owner, not to make the city whole. Is that also, that's the intention if we apply to the province?
That is correct. So it means that the provincial portion would also be lowered as a result of our implementation of this.
Okay, thank you. You are suggesting, first of all, with respect to who is eligible, employees or square footage, and you also suggested revenues. There are elements of the Income Tax Act for small businesses that generally work on revenue. Is that a consideration to be used to, if we choose to go to revenues as a delineating factor?
I'm happy to start off, and I'll just ask Joseph at the end if he has anything to add. I think you're talking about what I would call as the CCPC, um, as identified in the Income Tax Act, and that sets a maximum revenue for a small business. We are not recommending that we follow those limits, and I say that because one of the guiding principles in terms of what we're putting in front of committee and council today is that we need it to be this program needs to have the least amount of administration possible. And so in working with our partners at MPAC, what we have identified in terms of defining the small businesses are readily available information that they have that we don't have to collect separately through an application process. So we're looking at ease of administration to be able to capture as many businesses as we possibly can.
Okay, thank you.
Right.
It's just that contract employees or contract employees square footage doesn't really always define small businesses, but I do understand wanting to not have administrative burden on the city. How can we ensure if there's a reduction in property taxes, what can we do to ensure that the property owner passes the reduction along to the user of the property tenant, which is the business owner that is providing services to the community that we all want to support? Any thoughts or discussions with respect to that?
I'm just going to ask Joseph because I know a lot of thought has gone into that, and there's been lots of discussion about that.
So one of the things that we are looking at, and we will continue to explore different options, is doing what we did during when we offered the COVID-19 tax deferral relief, where on a complaints basis, we would be able to revoke that small business tax from that particular property if they're not passing on those savings down to the tenants. We're also considering other approaches in discussion with legal services to see how else we could potentially enforce and make sure that these discounts are passed on. And those will be included in our Q3 report when we come back.
Okay, thank you. I look forward to reading that. I think it's an important aspect. We want the people that are suffering, that have suffered a loss of business, to be able to get all the relief that is due to them. Just a couple more questions. You are recommending that this be funded by what you've referred to as residual properties in that class, and not across all the other subclasses, which might include residential classes, which would mean that increase being a little bit less, just flattening that curve. Can you explain to me a little bit more why that is your recommendation?
Okay, so our approach that we're presenting here today is anticipating that that the regulation that will come out from the province will handle this small business subclass similar to some of the other subclasses which are in place today. And the way the other subclasses work today is because they fall under a broader class. So for say, for example, the excess land will fall under the commercial broad class. And if we were to sort of increase or decrease the discounts, the benefits or the, I would say the lack of benefits would sort of fall towards that broader class. There's no opportunities for us to shift it out. Now, we'll have to see how the regulations come back with the province, but we've gone forward with the assumption that the province will sort of handle this in a very similar manner as they've handled the previous subclasses that are already in place today.
Through that, it might be dictated, as it might be supported by other programs. It might be dictated by the regs of the regulations of the province.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. And on another subject, rather than, if I can, my last question, with respect to slide 4, I just need to understand business education rate reduction. How does that impact the revenue of the municipality? I thought we get a budget or an amount that we need to collect from various school boards, it's apportioned between the classes. We receive money, we pass it along to the school boards or to the province. If there's a business education rate adjustment, I thought I saw on slide 4 that has an impact on municipal tax collection. Did I misread? Am I?
It doesn't, Councillor. Yeah, it's basically a flow through. So we collect money on behalf of the province to fund education. And so what they're doing is they've lowered those rates. We're not making up any difference whatsoever, and it just flows through. Yeah.
So it has no impact on the municipal budget of what we collect to fund bylaw roads,
Nope.
OPH, or anything else.
No.
Got it. Again, thank
Anything
you for your
else?
work on this file. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Merci.
Great. Merci, Conseiller Cloutier. Councillor Moffat, please.
Thanks. It's not directly related to the report today, but just something that that's come up recently. And as you know, when it comes to paying taxes, many of our residents and businesses in the rural area pay at the client service centers that are open and have the ability to collect. In fact, the one here in North Gore is so popular that we often have to have a security guard here because there's so much cash in the building on that day. Because we still have a lot of residents out here that pay cash in these buildings. The fact that we haven't been able to open these buildings and our client services in the rural area since the start of the pandemic, we haven't been able to shift or find a way to offer that service. We've had a number of people maybe not adapt as well. And as such, they've tried to pay their taxes on time, but it just hasn't happened. And it's caused them to incur a late penalty. I have a property owner recently that owns multiple properties, upwards of 5,000 acres. So you can imagine what the late penalty is on that, although they submitted their payment beforehand. Just curious if there's been any consideration, given the logistical changes in paying taxes, if we've considered any ability to waive those types of penalties. I'm not talking about people who pay their taxes a month late because they didn't go to the office on time, but people who have made an attempt to pay ahead of time, but just haven't gotten there. And I have to assume that other councillors may be seeing the same thing. I see George nodding his head, which he's kind of in the same boat, right? Because a lot of people would go out to Medcalf to pay their taxes, and now they can't. They have to go into Canada. They have to go into somewhere else. So I don't know if there's been any thoughts to that. I didn't mean to email you, but here we are.
No, it's a good question, Councillor. And I'm actually, I think we could take it offline with yourself and Councillor DeRuse. We have put, I'm going to say, a lot of communication in place in terms of talking about what those alternate options are, because it's extremely important right now, knowing that, there's limited in-person interaction. I know last year, and this was before we had all of the programs in place, we had provided a grace period, but that was because the client service centers literally shut down, I'm going to say, the day before tax due date. But happy to take this offline and have a conversation to see how we can best serve your residents and your constituents.
Right, yeah, I appreciate that, because it's not really it's not a deferral issue, right? They don't require tax deferral. They're trying to avoid paying a penalty when they didn't intend to incur one. So thanks for that, and we'll follow up. I appreciate that.
Just out of curiosity though, Councillor, how are they paying their Bell bill or their hydro bill? They must have some means to pay that. I'm just wondering why they're having trouble paying a property tax bill, because they must get a monthly bill from Bell or. Well,
generally they don't pay their Bell bill in cash at an office in North Gore. It's not really the same.
No, I know, but if they're paying their bills, they're paying it obviously by credit card or a check.
Not property taxes, not for rural residents all the time. A lot of times they pay cash. They want to do it in person, hand it off.
Yeah.
It's what they do. I can't explain it, but it's what they do.
Yeah, I'd be interested before we adopt a new policy, just see exactly how many people pay by cash.
Yeah, I'm not trying to create a blanket policy where all of a sudden we're giving people a loophole. I'm just trying to address the situation. That's all.
But yeah, I appreciate that. My only question is though, by giving them a few extra days or a few extra weeks, if the centers are still closed, how do they actually eventually pay their taxes?
Well, if you put your check in the mail a week ahead of time, and you get a penalty because it didn't get there on time. I'm not sure that's fair.
No, but you just said they're paying by cash.
Right. So in lieu of the ability to pay by cash, they have sent in a check.
Right.
And they still got a late penalty, even though the check was sent a week before the day they normally would pay.
Okay. Well, look forward to seeing if something can be worked out.
Thanks.
I'd like to add on that we will be communicating as we send out the final tax bills, different options that are available to pay. For folks, especially that have been paying it at client service centers, we're going to be recommending that they could actually pay their tax bills at their local bank. Most banks will accept cash payments, check payments, or even direct withdrawals, and they offer that service. Those funds get bundled up if they provide their tax bill and their roll number. Those funds will be sent directly to the city, and they will receive the same service as they would have received at a client service center. So those will be options that we will be providing in addition to other options that other people might be interested in, such as electronic payment options.
Right. Thanks, Joseph.
Seems like a good idea. Councillor Fleury.
Bon matin, Monsieur le Maire. Merci.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for the report.
And Joseph, thank you for the report this morning. I think the changes that are proposed by the provincial government are setting a new tone, obviously through the pandemic, but a really urgent tone to survive our Main Street and support our Main Streets. I hope that additional measures are contemplated. I know that the mayor and others are advocating for what will downtown Ottawa look like for the federal government in terms of office spaces, which I think has also a major implication for some of the businesses on Main Street, specifically in the city core in this case. My question is back to maybe Jan and Jean's question, and it relates to the restrictions or capture of the square footage. But I guess I have no understanding of. And I think Eli talked about that after too, where how do we make sure that it goes to the actual business, right? Because there are a number of agreements and factors where sometimes in the lease it's paid by the individual business, sometimes it's paid by the landlord, if you will. What I know, and what the second question to that is really relating to what happens in a strip mall. I assume that if in a bigger strip mall that meets the, let's say, above the 25,000, and I don't know, I'm thinking Izu Plaza out of, just to give you a location in mind, where there are a number of small ones, but the collective is way above the threshold that you're describing. How do we capture the differences in a strip mall of that environment that'd be on a main street, for example?
So with regards to the square footage, we will continue to consult on that. So our preliminary review showed that we were capturing the really intended beneficiaries with the 15,000 square feet. I think the consultation period over the summer will just give us a little bit more opportunity to sort of review some of those assumptions and to see if there's anything that we've missed or if there's any opportunities to increase that. In terms of being able to pass on those discounts directly to the tenants, we're going to be, again, one of the big items that we're sort of going to be putting out there, or the big stick that we would have, at least at this point in time, is the ability to revoke that small business class discount from those properties that we've actually provided them to. So this approach, just to, in terms of the previous question that was asked, will actually allow properties to receive this discount automatically. There is no application required, so there's no opportunity to forget or miss a deadline and so on and so forth. So it is a little bit more efficient in that way. And if property owners are not passing on that discount, then we will have the power to revoke it. And we're going to be working, we started having these discussions with BIAs to sort of help us really educate business owners in terms of understanding that this is a tool that the city this is a benefit that the city is going to have available and is going to be passing on to landlords, and that they should expect to see that. And if they're not seeing that, then we need to be hearing from them.
Okay, that I'll look forward to the consultation. Maybe as you opened up the element to the BIAs, I think it would be a useful tool for BIAs to get within their zone the level of reduction that that this tool is put in, because I think the BIAs often they're connected with their members, but they don't necessarily see the payment structure. They'll hear the complaint if there's a particular challenge with payment, or if it's a high payment, but the opposite is not true necessarily. So I wonder if we could be proactive and work with our BIAs to inform them within their district what the saving has been for the small business community. I think that would be a nice tool to have.
Absolutely, Councillor.
Can I clarify? So this measure, when it comes to council, would ultimately be depending on the provincial pieces, and Wendy, you were clear in the presentation on that, they would ultimately take effect in the new year, right? Is that?
Yeah, we'll bring a report forward that will summarize the consultation that we've done over the summer. And I'm going to say really refining the framework that we're putting in place. And then what you're going to see is once that's approved, it would carry forward to our next tax policy report for 2022. So around this time next year, you'll see it as, I guess, part of the menu in terms of the tax ratios and adoption of that class.
Okay. My final sort of comment on small businesses, and it's not necessarily related to the city, it's more to different tools that the province and the feds have. What I hear from businesses often is that there's a lot of short-term loans that are provided, but businesses are looking for a long-term loan where they could absorb the pandemic period, and repay it when everything is sort of back to normal over a number of years. So I know, Wendy, that's not in our municipal jurisdiction, but as the federal and provincial programs have come into play, that's the missing link that I'm sure Eli and others are hearing about, is just how do you absorb the period and not incur fixed costs that are, that are continuing to come in, and how do you absorb that over time? So just for the record. And again, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for the work on this.
Thank you. Councillor Sides, please.
Thank you. I thought Councillor Lieber is next, but I'll take it. I did want to pick up
just the FEDCO members first.
Oh, right. Of course. Thank you. Just a quick question, and that is with respect to our assumption right now that the province will match this 10% reduction. I don't think we have certainty yet. So just wondering, as this process moves forward, we go through consultation, how will we assess this if the province does not decide to match it?
Councillor, it was introduced in the framework when they tabled this last fall. So my assumption is that it will be a valid option, and the way they explained it is once the municipality makes a decision to adopt this subclass, we will then make application to them. And what I can tell you is, based on my experience from other things, they have never declined an application. So I think they want to be a very willing participant. And I say that because they've actually introduced the ability for us to put this small business subclass in place if we choose to do so.
Okay, excellent. That's great to hear. And also, I wanted to share my thanks, Wendy, to yourself and also to Joseph. You humored me with a lot of questions over the last month and getting into the weeds a bit about this, specifically for my ward, which I really appreciate. Those conversations were really helpful in understanding what this actually looks like, but also the commitment to consultation moving forward. I would echo Councillor Fleury's comments. I think the BIAs should be very involved in this and understanding what this looks like at the end of the day. I don't think the results will be equal across the city in our different BIA districts. And I think it's important that those conversations happen and that transparency is there, so that everyone knows what this is going to look like at the end of the day. But a lot of great work I know has gone into this, and my thanks to both of you. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Councillor Sides. Councillor Lieber, please.
Thank you, Mayor. So just picking up on the thread, I think you've heard from some of the other councillors, there is an assertion that's been made to me, at least, that some businesses that we want to capture may not be captured because the overall square footage of buildings that are, fairly large have not been turned into condos for the individual tenants who are in the building. So on the traditional Main Street on Richmond Road, there are some large commercial properties with multiple small businesses in them, but they're not condos. And so the business attracts a single tax bill. And I'm just hoping that you are bearing that in mind as we go through the consultations. Sorry, go ahead, Joseph.
I will say that we are including properties such as industrial malls, and industrial malls would be owned by a specific owner, but would house multiple small businesses. So we've looked at all these property use codes that MPAC assigns, and the goal of our review was to generally try and understand, based on those property use types, which properties are either lend themselves to the definition of a small business or we believe actually house small businesses. So an industrial mall, for example, is a very large property and could house several tens of businesses, right? And therefore, we're including that industrial mall in sort of a blanket fashion, even though it's a large property, it may exceed the 15,000 square feet threshold. But we know for a fact that all the people that are actually in that industrial mall are actually small businesses. So on the presentation that we provided, the first list actually is businesses that are sort of being included without any square foot threshold caps. But then the second list, which is a much shorter list, is really a list of properties that we think need a cap in order to make sure that these benefits are not being passed on to the wrong people.
Okay.
I hope that clarifies.
Yeah. So the opportunity to flag properties with you would be through the course of the consultation, I take it.
Exactly.
Yeah. A follow-up question with respect to the tax deferrals and the enforcement mechanisms that we have. Did we receive any complaints? I know the mayor was very strong when we first introduced the deferrals in letting landlords know our expectation was that those would be passed on. Did we end up having to investigate any complaints that the deferrals were not passed on to tenants?
I can say we did not receive any complaints, formal complaints, for us to investigate. In fact, what we heard is I think the landlords were pretty good in terms of being able to give their tenants a bit of a break. There were some complaints, informal complaints, but the landlords quickly sort of responded to that and fixed the situation. But by and large, when we kind of look at the percentage uptake of the deferral program, and maybe some of the informal complaints that came in, it's probably a handful, maybe I could put in one hand, and those were resolved fairly quickly.
Good. That's important, I think, to note is I am appreciative of the role that landlords have played in ensuring that they're trying to support their tenants through a very difficult time, obviously. So that's great to hear. Mayor, thank you.
Hey, thanks, Councillor Leeper. Councillor Kavanaugh, please.
Thank you very much for this. I just wanted some clarification because I'm just learning about this stuff. In terms of the small business category, are franchises included? Like, for example, an individual Tim Hortons operation?
So in some cases, yes, they would be included, depending on sort of how MPAC has actually classified that. And the reason for that is it's very difficult for us to sort of split out, say, for example, a McDonald's or a Subway, for example, that is owned, that is franchised and it's owned by an individual and is running it as a small business compared to, say, a Subway that's actually owned by sort of the corporate main office. So it'll be difficult for us to sort of pull those pieces apart. And therefore, we sort of have to rely on some of those property use codes in order to sort of determine which properties to sort of pick and which ones to exclude. And therefore, from that point of view, yes, we may wind up picking up maybe some of the corporate pieces, but by and large, I think most of the ones that we are going to be picking up are going to be probably small sandwich stores, small fast food stores that are not part of the larger names.
Okay, thank you. And sometimes there's small change, like for example, there's change that are within Ottawa, but there's a number of them. So are they all treated individually for, I don't want to give any examples, but let's just say a pizza place is in several locations, but it's the same owner. How is that treated?
It'll all be treated based on how or where they're located. I'll give you a really good example. You may have a pizza store that's located in a small strip mall that may receive a small business discount. But you may have the same pizza store, perhaps owned by the same owner inside a mall, and the malls are not going to be receiving the small business discount. However, they are going to they still sort of attract that retail rate and are already sort of paying that lower rate that we talked about earlier. So this approach sort of talks about is property driven, which is how property taxes are generally assessed. They're sort of driven towards the property itself. And therefore, we're not sort of driving it towards the owner, because then there would be a bit of a disconnect, or the business type. We're driving it towards the property so that it can dovetail well with the property taxation regime that we're in.
Okay, thank you. We were talking yesterday about short-term rentals. Are they under this at all?
Short-term rentals would not, at this point, where we have not really got into that point where we're considering short-term rentals as being part of this particular framework. There is no existing property use code in place for short-term rentals. Hotels are not included. But if short-term rentals do start to happen here in Ottawa and a code comes on, then we would have to sort of make that determination at that point in time as to whether they would be considered a small business or we would be treating them as a regular commercial, such as hotels.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else wish to speak? I don't see anyone else on the with their hand up. Just a question, Wendy, a little off topic. In terms of, in my case, I get a water bill, even though it's deducted out of my bank account. My understanding is, I think for some provincial law that requires you to send out a notice, which sort of defeats the purpose of trying to save the money. If I'm, getting it deducted by my bank account, could we not do maybe once or twice a year statement as opposed to every, I don't know when the water bill comes, is it every month or every quarter? I can't recall. It just seems like a waste, the whole purpose of me, going to online to allow them to take it out of my bank account is so that we save the paper and save the dollar a stamp.
Really great question, Mr. Mayor. First of all, we are legislated in terms of our automated withdrawals through the Canadian Payment Association. So we are required to send a notification. But what I would emphasize here is we have an online service where you can sign up to get an e-bill, and we are promoting that significantly across the city. So we don't need to print a bill and send it to you. We can simply deliver it electronically. I don't have the stats in front of me, but I can tell you that there's been significant uptake in this, which means we are now printing much less than we were in the past. And we are encouraging our residents to move to that service because they can basically view, print, and pay at the same time online without any intervention from us or having that requirement to send them a physical bill in the mail.
Can I still continue to have it withdrawn from my bank account and then just have the receipt sent electronically to my email account?
Yes, absolutely. And I can tell you that's exactly what I do. I get an e-bill and then the money comes out of my bank magically when it's due. So
yeah, so I don't know if, we sometimes have a message on the bills that we might be able to encourage people to do that, because I think it would save a lot of paper and a lot of money for us.
Thank you.
Okay. Great. So on the report is presented, carried,
Carried.
adopted, and motion to adjourn. Carried.
So move.
So moved. Carried. Thank you all very much. Have a great weekend. Stay safe.